They said she killed her husband with poison brewed from nightshade and the marrow of a blackbird's wing. The widow came back on the third day after they burned her out. Maeve Corrigan walked the last 2 miles barefoot, because the boots they'd torn from her feet when they dragged her to the edge of town were likely decorating some merchant's daughter's closet by now. The August sun had baked the earth hard as fired clay, and each step sent white pain shooting up through her heels into her spine. She didn't stop. The kind of tired she carried went deeper than bone. It was the exhaustion of a woman who'd spent 72 hours hiding in a ravine, drinking rainwater from cupped hands. The cottonwoods came into view first, their leaves silver green and shimmering. Then the blackened bones of what used to be her cabin. The smell hit her before the sight fully registered. Wet char and something sweeter underneath the rendered fat from the salt pork she'd been saving. The beeswax candles she'd made last winter, all melted into the soil. The roof had caved in completely. The stone chimney stood like a grave marker, smoke still curling from its top in thin gray ribbons. 3 days and it still smolders. Maeve stopped at the clearing's edge, her breath coming shallow. Her hands were shaking, had been shaking since they'd tied her wrists and paraded her down Main Street while the preacher's wife spat scripture and threw stones. There was still a cut above her left eye from that, crusted over but tender. She should turn around. Nothing here for her now. The cattle were gone. The chickens burned alive in their coop. Even the well had been poisoned. She could see something bloated floating in it, flies thick as a black cloud. But then she heard it, faint, almost swallowed by the wind through the cottonwoods. A baby crying. Maeve's breath stopped. Her heart kicked once, hard against her ribs. It came again, thin and reedy, the desperate wail of an infant, from inside the ruins. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. She stumbled forward and fell to her knees at the collapsed structure's edge. The crying grew louder. Definitely a baby. Definitely coming from beneath the charred timbers. "Hello?" Her voice cracked. "Is someone there?" The crying stuttered, then began again with renewed fury. Maeve's hand scrabbled at the burned wood. Still hot, not enough to blister, but enough to hurt. She pulled away a plank, then another. Ash billowed up and coated her throat. She kept digging. She uncovered the root cellar door after 5 minutes. Scorched black, but intact. She wrapped her skirt around her palm and yanked it open. Cool air rushed up. The crying echoed from the darkness, clearer now. Maeve climbed down the ladder until her feet touched packed dirt. The cellar was small. Most of her preserves were ruined, jars shattered from heat, but the stone walls had held. And in the corner, wrapped in what looked like a man's coat, was a baby. The hoofbeats came slow and deliberate, like a man who had all the time in the world or none left to lose. Maeve climbed out of the cellar with the baby clutched tight against her chest, the coat trailing behind her like a shroud. Her legs trembled as she stood in the ash, blinking against the bright afternoon sun. The child had gone quiet, its small face pressed into the hollow of her neck, breathing soft and steady. The rider appeared through the cottonwoods like a ghost, materializing from smoke. He sat tall on a gray mare, hat pulled low, dust coating his shoulders and the worn leather of his saddle. He didn't hurry. Just let the horse pick its way through the burned clearing until he was 20 feet from where Maeve stood frozen, holding a stranger's child in the ruins of her life. He stopped. The mare snorted and shook her head, uneasy with the smell of char. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Maeve could see him better now, older than her by maybe 10 years, 40 perhaps, weathered face, stubble gray at the jaw. His right hand rested easy on his thigh, but his left stayed near the rifle stock jutting from its scabbard. "A man used to trouble. Maeve Corrigan." His voice was rough, like gravel scraped across wood. She didn't answer, just held the baby tighter. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Heard they ran you out. Heard they said you were a witch and a poisoner. You heard right. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You kill your husband? He died of cholera, same as 4 other men that month. But his brother wanted the land, so he said different. The man nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already knew. He swung down from the saddle with the stiff movement of someone carrying old wounds. When his boots hit the ground, she saw he favored his left leg. Name's Caleb Strand, he said. Used to ride with your husband, before he married you, before the war. Maeve's throat tightened. She remembered now Thomas had mentioned a Caleb once or twice. A friend from his soldiering days. Said he'd gone north after Appomattox and never came back. What do you want? She asked. Caleb's eyes dropped to the bundle in her arms. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, maybe, or something heavier. That baby, he said quietly. I need to know where you found it. Maeve stepped back instinctively. Why? Because 3 days ago, a woman came to me in the night, begging. Said men were coming to kill her child because of who the father was. He paused, his jaw working. Said she knew they'd burn your place. Said you were the only one who'd understand what it meant to be condemned for nothing. The wind picked up, scattering ash across Maeve's bare feet. She put the baby in my cellar, Maeve said slowly, before they came. She did. Where is she now? Caleb looked away, toward the poisoned well. Dead. They caught her on the road south, hanged her from a cottonwood. The baby began to cry again, a thin wail that cut through the silence like a knife through thin paper. Maeve rocked the child automatically, her mind spinning. A woman hanged, a baby hidden, men willing to kill an infant because of who fathered it. She looked at Caleb Strand, saw the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders, the way his hand had moved unconsciously toward the rifle when he spoke of the hanging. Who was the father? She asked. Caleb's mouth thinned to a hard line. Samuel Greaves. The name landed like a stone in still water. Samuel Greaves owned half the county, the bank, the general store, the saloon. A deacon at the church. A man with a wife and 4 legitimate children and a reputation scrubbed so clean it gleamed. And the mother? Maeve's voice was barely a whisper. Juanita Morales worked his kitchen, 16 years old. 16. The same age Maeve had been when Thomas brought her west as his bride. Young enough to believe promises. Young enough to think love could protect you from men who took what they wanted and called it God's will. They'll come for the baby, Maeve said flatly. They will. Caleb moved closer, careful, like approaching a spooked animal. Which is why I came to get you both out. There's a settlement 3 days north, Cheyenne families. They'll take the child, raise it as their own. No questions. Maeve looked down at the baby in her arms. Its eyes were open now, dark and solemn, watching her face with that unblinking infant stare that seemed to see straight through to the bone. And me? She asked. Where do I go? With me, if you'll have it. Caleb pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased. Thomas wrote me a letter before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should look after you. Said his brother was a snake and you'd need protection. Maeve's eyes burned. Thomas had known, had seen what was coming and tried to prepare for it even as the cholera wrung him dry. I got nothing left, she said. No money. No proof I'm anything but what they say I am. Caleb reached out slowly and pushed back the hair from her forehead, exposing the cut above her eye. His fingers were gentle, calloused, surprisingly warm. You got proof enough, he said quietly. Right there on your face. He pulled something else from his pocket, a thin piece of charred wood, black and brittle. At first, Maeve didn't understand. Then she saw the words carved into it, crude but legible. Witch, poisoner, shamed. Found it nailed to what's left of your door frame, Caleb said. Figured you'd want to decide what happens to it. Maeve stared at the sign. The physical weight of their judgment, their hate, condensed into a piece of burned wood small enough to snap between her hands. She didn't snap it. Instead, she tucked it carefully into the baby's coat along with the child. "I'm keeping it," she said, "so this baby knows. So when it's grown, I can show it what people do when they're afraid, what they're capable of." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "We leave now," he said, "before they come back to make sure the job's finished." They made it 6 miles before the riders found them. The sun was sliding toward the horizon, painting the scrubland in shades of copper and blood. Maeve rode behind Caleb on the gray mare, the baby strapped against her chest with strips torn from her skirt. Her arms ached from holding the child steady, and her burned feet throbbed where they hung against the horse's flanks, but she didn't complain. Caleb hadn't spoken since they left the ruins, just pointed the mare north and kept a steady pace. When the dust rose behind them, he saw it first. "Company," he said quietly, and reined the mare to a stop. Maeve looked back. 5 riders, maybe 6, coming hard across the flat. Even at this distance, she recognized the lead horse, a big bay gelding that belonged to Marshal Wheaton. Thomas's brother rode beside him on a sorrel. "They're not here to talk," she said. "No." Caleb's hand moved to his rifle. "They're not. You can't fight 6 men. Don't intend to." He turned the mare east, toward a rocky outcrop maybe half a mile off. "But I can make them think twice about what comes after." They reached the rocks as the riders closed to within 100 yards. Caleb swung down and helped Maeve dismount, then slapped the mare's rump and sent her trotting away. "She'll come back when I whistle. No sense getting her killed." He positioned Maeve behind a large boulder, the baby still clutched against her. Then he took up a spot 10 feet to her left, rifle braced against the rock, and waited. The riders came to a halt 50 yards out, spreading into a loose line. Marshal Wheaton sat in the center, his badge catching the late sun. Thomas's brother Henry Corrigan was beside him, and Maeve recognized the others now. Deputy Curtis, the blacksmith's son, 2 ranch hands from the Greaves property. Men with something to protect. "Maeve Corrigan." Wheaton's voice carried clear across the distance. "You're wanted for theft and kidnapping. Give up the child and we'll make this easy." Caleb's answer was to lever around into the chamber. The metallic sound echoed off the rocks. Wheaton shifted in his saddle. "Caleb Strand. Didn't figure you for a fool. This ain't your fight. Made it mine when you hanged a girl for the crime of being used," Caleb called back. "Made it mine when you burned an innocent woman's home to cover a rich man's shame." Henry Corrigan spat into the dust. "That woman poisoned my brother. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows what you told them," Caleb said. "Funny how Thomas's death gave you his land. Funny how you filed the claim 2 days after they buried him." A tense silence settled over the scrubland. The baby stirred against Maeve's chest but didn't cry. Then a new sound cut through the quiet. Hoofbeats, coming from the north. Everyone turned. A single rider approached Small, slumped in the saddle. As it drew closer, Maeve's breath caught. A child, a boy, maybe 10 years old, riding a mule with a rope halter. He pulled up between the 2 groups, small and defiant in the dying light. "Miguel Morales," Wheaton said slowly. "Boy, you get yourself home. This ain't for children." The boy's face was streaked with tear tracks through the dust, but his voice came out steady. "That's my sister's baby. Juanita's baby. Your sister was a liar and my sister is dead." The boy's shout rang out across the rocks. "You killed her. Mr. Greaves used her and you killed her for it, and now you want to kill her baby too." His words hung in the air like smoke. One of the ranch hands shifted uncomfortably. The blacksmith's son looked away. "Boy," Wheaton said, gentler now. "It ain't that simple." "It is." Miguel's voice cracked. "It is that simple. You're just too scared of Mr. Greaves to say it." The silence that followed the boy's words was the kind that births either violence or truth. Marshal Wheaton's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Henry Corrigan's face had gone red as a skinned knee. But the ranch hands the men with nothing personal to gain. They sat their horses like statues, eyes fixed on the boy on the mule. Then the blacksmith's son spoke. "I saw Mr. Greaves with that girl," he said quietly. "Last spring, behind the mercantile. Wasn't the first time neither." "Shut your mouth," Wheaton hissed. "No, sir." The young man's voice grew stronger. "I'm tired of shutting my mouth. Tired of watching good people burn for rich men's sins." He turned his horse and rode away slowly, his back straight as a rifle barrel. The spell broke. One of the ranch hands followed, then the other. Within a minute, only Wheaton, Henry, and Deputy Curtis remained, and Curtis looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Wheaton's jaw worked. His eyes moved from the departing riders to Caleb's rifle to the boy on the mule, to Maeve holding the baby in the shadows of the rocks. "This ain't over," he said finally. "Yes," Caleb said, "it is." Wheaton wheeled his horse and rode south, Curtis trailing behind him. Henry Corrigan lingered a moment longer, hate radiating from him like heat from a stove, before he too turned away. Miguel dismounted and walked his mule toward the rocks. Up close, Maeve could see he had his sister's eyes, the same dark, solemn stare the baby had given her in the cellar. "Can I see?" he asked softly. Maeve knelt and unwrapped the coat enough to show the child's face. Miguel reached out one dirt-stained finger and touched his niece's cheek with a gentleness that made Maeve's throat close up. "She looks like Juanita," he whispered. "She does," Maeve said, though she'd never seen the girl alive. "Will you keep her safe?" "I will. I promise you." Miguel nodded. He pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden cross on a leather cord, hand-carved and worn smooth. "Juanita wore this. I cut it off before they." He couldn't finish. "I want the baby to have it." Maeve took it carefully and looped it around the baby's neck. "What was your sister's whole name?" "Juanita Maria Morales." "Then that's what we'll call her, Maria. So she remembers where she comes from." The boy's face crumpled then, and Maeve pulled him close with her free arm, this child who'd just lost his sister and stood up to armed men to protect what remained of her. He sobbed once, twice, then pulled back and wiped his face roughly. "I should go," he said, "before they come looking." He rode away north as the sun touched the horizon. Caleb whistled for the mare. She came trotting back, and he helped Maeve mount before swinging up behind her. They rode through the twilight in silence, the baby asleep between them. 3 days later they reached the Cheyenne settlement, but Maeve didn't leave Maria there. She couldn't. Instead, she and Caleb kept riding west, into territory so remote the law forgot it existed. They built a cabin by a spring-fed creek, and Maeve planted a garden over the spot where she buried the charred sign that had named her witch and poisoner. The wood rotted into the soil, feeding the roots of the squash and beans she grew. Maria thrived, learned to walk in the wildflowers behind the cabin, learned to speak in 2 languages, English from Maeve, Spanish from the words Maeve made herself remember and teach, learned her mother's name and how she died. On Maria's 5th birthday, Maeve showed her the wooden cross and told her the story of Miguel's courage. On her 10th, Maeve showed her the scar above her eye and explained what people do when they're afraid. On her 16th, Maria planted a cottonwood sapling at the edge of the garden, over the place where the sign was buried, and said a prayer in Spanish for her mother, and for Maeve, and for all the women who'd been branded and burned and forced to prove their right to draw breath. Caleb lived long enough to see the tree grow taller than the cabin roof. When he died, they buried him facing east, toward the sunrise, and Maria carved his name into a river stone with her own hands. Maeve lived another 20 years after that, long enough to see Maria marry a Cheyenne man who treated her with kindness, long enough to hold Maria's daughter and whisper the names of the women who'd come before. When Maeve finally closed her eyes for the last time, Maria buried her in the garden beside Caleb, beneath the cottonwood that grew from shame reclaimed. The tree still stands. If you pass that way, and few do, for the land is wild and the roads uncertain, you can see it from a distance, its silver-green leaves catching the light. Locals say a woman lived there once, a widow, maybe a witch. The stories differ, but the tree remembers. And if you listen close on summer evenings when the wind moves through the branches, you can almost hear it whisper the question that the West asks of all who cross it. What will you do when they come to burn your house? Will you run, or will you stand in the ashes and dig until you find what's worth saving? Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe my channel please for more videos.